Hello, everyone. Thank you all for listening, watching another episode of the Stivers Show. Justin Stivers here. Very excited to have my friend guest, Melanie Leonard with Streamline Legal. Melanie, what's going on?
I'm so excited to be here. It's been a long time since we've chatted, and I feel like I have so much to say.
We got a lot of stuff to talk about. So, but before we dive in, I always like to ask, who are you and what do you do?
Absolutely. So my name's Melanie Leonard, and I founded a company called Streamline Legal, and that was about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago now. Gosh, time flies. At Streamline Legal, we help law firms get the most out of their practice management software. So we'll help law firms with workflows and intake processes and billing procedures and all the things that make your firm tick and help you get work done. Um, I will tell you though that it's been a wild ride. I'm also a practicing attorney, and I'm not currently practicing, thank goodness, that would be a lot. But I started my own practice about 14, 15 years ago and did that for about 12 years before I sold it, doing residential real estate in the Chicago area. And I had a great time helping clients buy and sell their houses, but really what it taught me was how to build a system, because it was the same contract, same closing, day in, day out, and it really helped to develop a system within our office to deal with that. So it got to a point where I just loved building systems more than I loved practicing law. So here I am today.
So you were practicing, a couple years ago before you got into this, because I've noticed, um, maybe it's just because I'm in the space now, but there's so much out there for lawyers in terms of case management software, billing, like there's so much product out there right now. My feeling is that 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. And it's kind of shifted, which kind of coincides with like this newer generation of attorneys or attorneys who've been practicing a while. And they're like, wait, the way we've been practicing before sucks. Let's try to figure out a better way. Is that kind of what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, I remember I live in the Chicago area, and the ABA Tech Show is usually in Chicago. And so I remember going to the tech show, like, I don't know, maybe about 8, 10 years ago. And you would walk around to the different vendor booths, and there were like two or three out of like, 100 that were promoting practice management software. And so, of course, I found them fascinating. I chat with them. But then fast forward like 5 years down the road, I go back, and now it's like all but two or three booths are talking about practice management software. So there has definitely been a huge increase, not just based on the tech show, of course, but there's also a huge increase in the amount of investors and the amount of money that's being pumped into this space. And so what I think that really does, thankfully for us, is it allows the products to, compete with each other. And you have more and more products coming along saying, oh, well, we do this better or we do that better. And so I really think it's really driving a lot of innovation, which I'm super excited to see. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is if you're trying to use practice management software, there are a ton of choices and you can quickly become overwhelmed. I mean, it's not an easy proposition. I will say though, the real secret, or at least I think the secret, is they're a lot more similar than they are different. I mean, especially if we're talking about, your web-based, the products that have the same features. You've got your calendar, you've got your contacts, you've got your, billing system, things like that. If you look at a Clio, a Practice Panther, in my case, stuff like that, it's all a lot more similar than different. And so if you're not using anything, or if you're feeling like you're not getting the most out of your software, like th- there's definitely a benefit to hopping in, but it matters much less which one you pick, than that you actually pick something and go with it. And so that's the advice I would give to anybody who's feeling a little overwhelmed by that process. It's much more important that you just start using what you have or find something to start using than to spend a ton of time. We kind of get in this analysis paralysis, right? Like, I'm sure you've had that situation where it's like, wait, this one is so much better, or that one's so much better. Oh no, I don't know. And now in the meantime, we've lost 6 months of productivity because we didn't pick anything. So that's my advice as far as that goes.
Yeah, I see that a lot, like in chat groups and different things. Like one of the most commonly asked questions, like, "Hey, I'm thinking about switching from this to this. What do you guys think, and I'm always thinking like, well, I don't know. I have no clue what you like, what works for you versus like what works for me. And I agree. I think it's like, you got to pick one, stick with it. And there's like, I mean, maybe switch if it's not working for you, but there is like, in my experience, there is no like perfect one that's going to meet every single solution. You're going to have to like pick and choose pieces and fight your battles on ones.
It's true. I hope it would be nice if maybe in the future someday there was like the one practice management system to rule them all, but such a thing does not currently exist, and I think it will be quite some time before that happens, if ever. And here's the thing. I mean, yes, it does take some more coordination using multiple software to, create this perfect system that you're looking for. But it also gives you more opportunity. I mean, like if I want to switch this piece and not switch the whole thing, that gives me an opportunity to do that. So I don't think it's all bad, but it definitely does give you a lot to think about. That's for sure.
So what are like some of the core components of like any, because I know that's like a large part of your business, right? Is helping people get the most out of their case management software. And there's a lot of things that I think, myself included, that there's probably things that we could be doing that we're not doing just because we don't have the time to build it out. Maybe we don't even know that the software does it. But what are some of like the core components that like, hey, if you got any software, these are the things you need to really be utilizing?
Yeah, it's funny because I meet a lot of people, a lot of attorneys that will buy practice management software specifically because they know they have to get bills out, right? And so whether it's a flat fee or an hourly or whatever, I've got to get some bills out, and so they'll buy it and they'll use it for that purpose. Not always very well, but it's definitely high up on the list of features that people will try and figure out and start using, which is great. Obviously, we need money to make the business run. But one of my favorite features within practice management software is that task management or project management aspect. And so, some software will call it workflows, some calls it task lists. There's all kinds of names they use, but basically this idea that we're going to build a system for every time we get a, divorce case in, or every time we get a new real estate sale in. These are the steps we're going to take, and this is how we're going to handle that. And that's how I started within my firm was, just building it out for ourselves and saying, what are the steps we're taking? Because honestly, they're almost always the same. Even when they're not the same, now we can have a system to quickly identify why is this file different, and we can address it, right? As opposed to just trying to shove it into the system with everything else. So it really is helpful to have some type of task management, project management, where I can keep track and say, okay, these are the steps we're going to take. You're going to do this one at this time. You're going to do that one at that time, and build that out. Now, obviously, it takes some time and energy to build that out, but the return on investment is going to be so high. I get a lot of attorneys that complain and say, I always feel like I'm the one having to push these cases forward in my office. Like we have to do a review meeting every week or else nothing, we don't get a lot of progress. And so that's a really hard burden as a managing attorney to have to bear. Whereas if I have this task system, so to speak, then it's basically mapped out everything we have to do for the next however many weeks or months or, however long this file goes on. And so I really think that it's an invaluable tool to kind of take that onus off of us as managing attorneys and put that onto the software to say, okay, here's our plan. This is how we're going to handle it. Maybe we adjust a few things for this case or we adjust a few things for that case, but we have a plan that now we can have a team execute on. Because if we're trying to do it all ourselves, it's just not going to work very well in most cases. So I think that having that plan, especially when we're working with a team to be able to direct them, is just invaluable.
Yeah, it's huge. I was just thinking about like the way we do it, and it can definitely be improved upon, but having a workflow where you're not the one saying, okay, now you do this, now you do this, you do this, and then meet back in a couple of days and say, did you do that? Now you got to do this, you got to do this. I mean, I would imagine that's huge. And probably most attorneys listening, want that, but just feel like they don't have the time or the energy or know-how to kind of like actually make that happen.
And it's true. I mean, it does take a time investment at the beginning, especially, right? But again, I mean, do you want to be rethinking this workflow with every case? Or do we want to come up with these are the steps we do 80, 90% of the time. And now we can just work on fine tuning these parts for each case, and that's that. I mean, trust me, I've practiced both ways. I've been very reactive in my practice where, I'm just responding to emails and phone calls and, what fire needs to put out next and where's the emergency now, as opposed to with workflows, it made us a lot more proactive. And so I was able to sit back a bit and say, okay, this is working well, this is not working. I need to put my attention towards this that's not working. But if we don't have any system or procedure built out that says this is the expectation, it makes it a lot harder to have to rethink and re-implement that every single time on every single case.
Well, what about, I know another thing we were talking before we started filming is the calendar and how important that is. And it seems like something so basic, so simple, but I know it's something you were passionate about. So I wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. And especially this time of year, like I'm just thinking that my kids get out of school in like 6 weeks and they'll be home and I'll be trying to run a law firm or a business, I should say. And, it all comes down to the calendar. Like, I want to be able to, as a business owner, I want to be able to take that time off. I want to be able to have, a Thursday afternoon where I go to the park with them, or a Monday morning where we can just, have a lazy breakfast, and then go and do some work. So, like, that's really one of the biggest benefits I think of owning my own business is to be able to do those kinds of things. But if what really happens is my business is running me because I'm not taking the time and effort to put that time aside and plan for that, then it essentially defeats a lot of the purpose in my mind. So I'm really passionate, especially this time of year, about looking at the calendar and figuring out how am I as a business owner going to structure things so that we can make these things happen. Does this mean I'm working a little extra on weekends, or does this mean I'm hiring another person to help me out so that I don't have to work as often? We don't know what it means until we actually sit down and look at our calendar. How are you using your time and how do you plan to use your time? And so we talk about things with our clients like, scheduling software. I love a scheduling software. Just all that back and forth, like, are you available? Well, now I'm not available. And by the time they get back to you, it's a mess. And so scheduling software is a huge component, but then also time blocking. I mean, I have so many attorneys that they'll make these great lists of things they need to do, but then they don't actually set aside the time to do them. And it's like, well, I'll try to whittle down my list as I have time throughout the day. Well, if your calendar is booked solid, you're never going to get to that list. So yeah, calendar is definitely something that I'm thinking about a lot, especially this time of year.
Yeah, it's something so basic, and I live and die by my calendar. I mean, I
Yeah.
have so many different calendars, and for those who are watching, I even use a note card each day. I'll write down everything on my, it's crazy, but yeah, I mean, it's just it's really, I mean, it's again so basic and so fundamental, but it's like such a great way to be incredibly efficient and get so much more done as opposed to just like waking up and doing everything, reactive, like you said, checking your email, who put a meeting on my calendar. And it's like all those good intentions list that you had, things you wanted to do, you don't have time to do any of them. And you just kind of feel like you're spinning your wheels. So I'm hugely, and so do you kind of recommend with your clients, how do you integrate that with the case management software? Are they using that? Are they using their Outlook, their Gmail?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say that most of our clients are using either a Gmail or an Outlook product to be able to check their email and keep their calendar. We recommend most practice management software these days will integrate with those two products. And so I usually do recommend that integration just because as great as it is to use it on those products, being able to have it within the system, I can do all kinds of things like, it really makes time entry much easier because now I can just go to the calendar in the software and click on it to add a time entry. Being able to track those appointments based on the matter. So if I want to go to my, real estate closing matter and I can see all the different calendared events, maybe it's deadlines, maybe it's closings, maybe it's, financial financing deadlines, whatever. So being able to associate those calendar events with a matter, I think is really, really helpful. And that's a lot harder to do if you're not using the calendar within your practice management software. So oftentimes we'll recommend using both. As far as scheduling tools go, there are some practice management software now that are coming out with scheduling tools, which I think is great. I am still a fan, though, of Calendly and Acuity. I just think they're a lot more robust than some of the other options. And so by being able to integrate Calendly or Acuity with Google or Outlook with your practice management software, it sounds like a big chain, but I have to tell you, it works really well. So we recommend that with some regularity.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to, I mean, I do all of that, but listening to, I'm like, man, that's like really overwhelming sounding, but I know I've already done it. So it's like, it's not really like, I don't even think about it now, but I think that's where a lot of people get, I think you can go extremes. You can go one extreme, like, hey, I don't have the time to do that. And then the other extreme, like I see people just like constantly getting more and more stuff, like adding new programs, new software, always asking for what's the latest and greatest. And I think that can be equally detrimental.
Oh, I agree. I mean, we call that the shiny object syndrome, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, something else came out. I better check it out. It's like that fear of missing out, right? Like, well, what if it's better than what I have, right? Maybe it is, but I mean, how much better can it be? And how unhappy are you with what you have, right? Like, if you're happy with what you have, ride that to the bank. Like, because I don't care what practice management software you have or you switch to, switching is not easy and it is painful. So even with a good plan and a good execution, it is still a challenge. And so I do recommend that if you're not happy with what you're using, yes, please try and find something that will work better for you. But if you're happy and like, I, I, I think I would just be careful of the shiny object syndrome because it can be very distracting. Frankly, it's the whole reason I don't practice law anymore, because it's a lot more fun for me to look at software than to be practicing law. So now in my new job, I get to do that.
I probably don't disagree with you on that. Well, I know we're coming up on our time, so I want to, make sure people can find you. And I know you've also launched a new podcast, so we can plug that as well. But, well, first, before we get there, what's kind of one or two tips you would give to practitioners out there that like, hey, I know we touched on the calendar, so you got to use your calendar. You said whatever case management software, use one, pick one, use it. Anything else that, is like, hey, basics 101 or, advanced, this is what you got to be getting to.
Yeah, I want to talk just a second about automation, because people ask me about automation all the time, and I'm a huge fan of automation. I think it's a great idea. But what I would recommend to people that are thinking about automation or have talked about it and not sure where to start, number one, listen to the podcast that's coming up. I just recorded one, and we'll get to that in a second. But number two is start simple, start basic. Like, there are things and tools that you already have that you could be automating that you may not be thinking of. Let's think about your email. Do you have filters or rules in there that are helping you, manage that email? If you're not, that's an awesome place to start. So think about those smaller things, and automating those things are going to buy you a lot more time to start planning and building out those super big and fancy automations that we think about when we think about intake, or when we think about, automating processes within our office. So yeah, love automation, but start small and build your way up is my lesson.
Love it. Yeah. I could go off on that. Again, one of those areas where I see people try to get they get buried in the weeds, and just pick like a couple of things. And again, this is kind of myself, my experience is like, nothing is going to be perfect. There's always going to be like one little broken thing, or it won't do exactly what you want it to do. Just, good is good enough. So
start somewhere. Absolutely. Yeah. So we are talking about that. We've just launched a podcast called Your Law Firm is a Business, Take It to the Next Level. And I appreciate you letting me come on here and talk about it a bit, because I really think our goal is to be very practical, and it's geared towards law firm owners that are looking to take their business to the next level. So yes, thank you for the opportunity, and check it out wherever you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. Melanie, thank you for being on here. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
Absolutely. We can be found online at www.streamlined.legal. We're also all over Facebook. So if you are looking for some quick tips about practice management software, check us out on Facebook. We've got some videos that'll really come in handy.
Cool, cool. Awesome, Melanie. Pleasure speaking with you. Let me know when you're back down here in Miami.
Absolutely. Thanks, Justin.
Take care.